We're diving into the abyss of madness that is Eldritch Horror and revealing 13 house rules that will make the board game feel more modern and hit your table a lot more often. You will find suggestions that you might even bring to other games in your collection. So before the stars align and the Ancient One awakens, let's quickly dive into it. House rule number 1, choosing investigators. This depends on your preferences, but choosing a character can get tedious, especially if you have all the expansions. But just randomly selecting one takes away from the game. So in our house, each player gets four random character sheets and can select from these. It's like browsing through job applications for your apocalypse survival team. Pick one that will get the job done, but if you're unhappy with the selections, each player has one-time chance to exchange their 4. A mulligan, as the cool kids say. We feel like few restrictions in character selection create great suspense and make the selection a mini-game in itself that's much quicker than just selecting from all the options. House rule number 2, passing the investigator token. The original rules state, at the end of the Mythos phase, the lead investigator may pass the lead investigator token to another investigator of his choice. So you could just leave it with one player until you need a specific investigator to be the leading one. Alternatively, try passing it to the next player each round, like a cursed relic no one really wants to hold. You'll notice that people will be a tiny bit more engaged with the game. Plus, a lot of card effects target the lead investigator. Now, this burden will be shared between players rather than one person getting all of them. So pass it around until you really need a specific player to go first. House rule number 3, return used cards to the box. There's nothing quite like solving a mysterious encounter card, but the thrill might not be the same when the next game you see the same cards, like a bad case of déjà vu. To keep things fresh, we exile used encounter cards until the deck runs dry, even between different game sessions. You'll just need to figure out your storage system, so you don't mix up which decks are used and which are not. This especially feels great if you have multiple expansions or play the campaign variant. Every mystery solved becomes a permanent victory, and you won't have to step on the same slimy tentacle twice. House rule number 4, damage and horror tokens. A super quick one. Rules state that at the beginning of the game you should deal each player their health and sanity tokens, but instead of hoarding them like a paranoid investigator stockpiling canned goods, we dish out tokens as players take damage or lose sanity. This way tokens represent what has been lost, not what's left. It's a really tiny change, but it feels more intuitive and it means you have less stuff in front of you. Let's go to a beefier one and see if you can still keep up. House rule number 5, separate asset piles. Asset rows sometimes get clumped up with the same resources that aren't useful for your missions, so gather resources action seems like a waste of time for the whole game. Plus there's a huge pile of assets and shuffling them is pain. This is the solution. Split your asset decks into 4 piles: weapons and items, allies, services, miscellany and exotica, and place each pile in one of the spots under reserve. This now becomes the bar in the city where you can find your recruits. This pile symbolizes all the services and organizations available in the city. There we have a local arcane store and of course the general store. 2 issues you might encounter with this. Number 1, what happens when you gain a random asset from the deck? Well, either get a 1d4 die and roll it and see which pile you get it from, or roll a regular 1d6 die twice. The first roll determines whether you get the first 2, if you rolled 1 or 3, or the last 2 piles, if you rolled 4 and a 6. And then roll it again to determine which of these lucky piles will be the winner. A little bit tedious, but it's worth it. The second problem is what happens with specific investigator powers like Roland's, where he gets a random service asset from the deck. In this case, just roll a die and based on the results, determine if he wants to use that action or not. Only when he sees the cards, then he can choose if he wants to use that action or not. Are you still here? Okay, mad respect. You're a real one. House rule number 6, reading texts for others. A few weeks back, I made a house rules video about different board games and mentioned a house rule that we use to make a game of Eldritch Horror much quicker and have less downtime: simultaneous moves. If you want to try that method, I'll post the video with the exact timestamps in the top comment. But there's another way how you can improve the drag of the downtime. We have added an extra spice to our games by other players reading out loud cards for the active investigator. So if it would be my turn, the person on my left picks the card I want and then reads it to me. This keeps more players invested in the game for longer, because even if it's not your turn, you're participating in it. Plus, some of the cards will state, for example, if you choose to save the lady from the fall, read the success. If you refuse, then read this. And we let the player choose without knowing the consequences. That gives a lot more layers to the story and emotions as well. And then it's like sitting around a campfire and telling ghost stories, where you don't quite know if you'll make it out alive. House rule number 7, shorten being delayed. Getting delayed in Eldritch Horror can feel like being stuck in traffic. You have to place your character sideways and will skip the next 2 actions. And it sucks in a game that already has plenty of downtime. So to not change the game too much but make it more fun for everyone, for us delayed means standing up only takes 1 action, not 2, but the other action that you now have available can't be used to travel. We are delayed. It's a small tweak that keeps the players in thick of action without removing the sting of failure. You still lost that action, you still can't move, but you can do something. House rule number 8, discarding monsters. Similar to the encounter cards, once a monster is defeated, it's out for good. No putting it back in the monster cup, unless of course it's tied to the Ancient One's mechanic. Then you have no choice but to deal with its slimy return. This house rule keeps things fresh and makes every encounter feel unique. House rule number 9, shuffling spells. This one goes out for all the chaos lovers. Every time a spell is cast, shuffle it back into the deck and draw a new copy of the same card. This way you will never know if you'll get the same one, and the unpredictability keeps the arcane arts as mysterious as they should be. But beware, it adds more shuffling to already shuffle-heavy game, so proceed with caution. House rule number 10, awakening the Ancient One. When the doom track hits 0 and the Ancient One awakens, nothing really happens. It should feel like the world is actually ending, right? But it doesn't, because you still need to solve the same mysteries, and only then, when you're done with that, you can encounter the beast. Well, not anymore. Thanks to Keon Peters' brilliant rule, you immediately jump to the final mystery, but with a twist. Each unresolved mystery makes it harder to defeat him. Just adjust its difficulty by 2 for each unresolved mystery. This means the game will be quicker, and when things hit the fan, you'll feel the weight of impending doom like never before. It feels much more thematic. House rule number 11, impairment tokens. Signs of Carcosa expansion introduced impairment tokens that lower your investigator's skills. I like the mechanism, but sometimes it means your investigator feels useless, and the game doesn't provide a reliable way to get rid of them. What you could do is implement a new action, available to all players. Discard 2 focus tokens to reduce an impairment token by 1. Depending on your wish for game difficulty, you might also add resources to the equation. But 2 focuses and an action seems a fair trade for me for a reliable way to remove impairment tokens. House rule 12, removing cards. Few cards can make investigators simply lose the game without much hope. This feels like a real bummer, so we remove them from the game altogether. These cards are All or Nothing and Azot's Research 5, both of which make you put solved mysteries back into the deck, not just making the game much tougher, but also longer. So just remove these cards unless you really enjoy the sight of everyone's shoulders just slumping down when you read the card aloud. You might also consider removing Evil Never Sleeps and Imaginable Horror. These make you draw and resolve another Mythos card. It's not that bad, and we personally have kept it in, but I can see why some people remove them. Another one is the Ravage of Time. It impairs each investigator's highest skill 3 times. It's not the end of the world, but I've noticed that a lot of people's first reaction is, so what's the quickest way to die? And last one is the Heart of Winter artifact. It's useless in most games unless you're playing with Itakwa, so might consider setting it aside for any other scenarios. And last, house rule number 13, more disasters please. Disasters are some of my favorite and most exciting elements introduced in the expansions, but they're just limited to specific scenarios. Ian comes to the rescue and has made a way to implement these in all the games you'd like to. When setting up the game, add 1 Eldritch token on each of these positions in the Doom track according to the ancient one you play. Whenever Doom advances to a place containing an Eldritch token, draw and resolve a disaster. One rule that I have added to this is that maybe you would like to roll a die to see if you actually need to trigger a disaster or not. Let's say you roll a 1d6, and from 1 to 3 you read it, and from 4 to 6, not. This will keep the suspense and won't get old after just few games. Plus, having one die roll change your destiny is always fun. Of course, this makes the game harder, but you're up to the challenge, right? And there you have it, our 13 house rules to enhance your Eldritch Horror experience. Will you survive the madness or will you be devoured by the chaos? There's only one way to find out. Click that like button so we know we're not screaming into the void, and write in the comments what house rules have you implemented in your favorite games. Until next time, keep your wits sharp and your monsters shuffled.